Greetings, fellow gorehounds, and welcome to the very first edition of When Animals Attack! This month, it's all about man versus beast, as I will be releasing episodes of both blood-splattered adaptations and blood-splattered cinema dedicated to the physical embodiments of nature's fury. Let us begin our journey of claws and teeth with a trip to a small New England town called Castle Rock. So lock up your car doors and pray that your boxed lunches will last you a few days while I decide which is superior, Cujo or Cujo. Round 1, the story. Stephen King's Cujo follows a family of New Englanders as the triviality of their domestic woes is put into dramatic perspective when a rabid St. Bernard lays siege on their broken down Pinto. In both mediums, the core story is essentially the same. Mommy cheats on Daddy, Daddy takes off to New York on a business trip, Mommy and son take car to local repairman, and then f***ing Cujo. But there are two major differences worth noting. The first being a subplot involving the little boy's night terrors. In the book, it's heavily implied that a child murderer from one of King's previous novels, The Dead Zone, has somehow inhabited the boy's closet. This leads to the father crafting what the boy refers to as the monster words, a poem designed to ward away evil.
Monsters, stay out of this room. You have no business here. No monsters under Tad's bed. You can't fit under there. No monsters hiding in Tad's closet. It's too small in there. No monsters outside of Tad's window. You can't hold on out there. No vampires, no werewolves, no things that bite. You have no business here. Nothing will touch Tad or hurt Tad all of this night. You have no business here.
The film keeps the idea of the monster words, as well as the boy fearing a creature in his closet, but cuts away any supernatural implications. I actually prefer this, because while the madman's inclusion does expand the overall Castle Rock mythos, it still feels out of place with the rest of the narrative. Cujo is not a beast of supernatural origin, and only one incredibly minor character exhibits any sort of otherworldly power. But I'll get to her when we talk about the characters. Moving on, the second major difference lies in the endings. And yes, fellow gorehounds, there be spoilers ahead. You hath been warned. In the novel, after suffering through the blistering heat and experiencing one hope for survival crushed after another, the mother decides to take the ultimate risk and combat Cujo head-on. Though badly injured in the process, she slays the dog just in time for her hubby to arrive. All seems well, until he checks on their son.
Oh my God, Vic said, his voice rising thinly in the stillness. She looked over and saw him taking something out of the back of her Pinto. A sack of something. Potatoes? Oranges? What? Had she been shopping before all this happened? Yes, but she had taken the groceries into the house. She and Tad had taken them in. They used his wagon. So what? Tad, she tried to say, and ran to him.
This ending isn't just bittersweet, it's a kick to the balls. The movie, on the other hand, takes the opposite approach, with the mother saving her son's life in the face of certain death. It's still sad because of what they had to go through to get to that point, but it's also uplifting at the same time. And therein lies the rub. King's original ending is a cynical and depressing lesson in how much life sucks. Whereas the movie proclaims no matter how much life knocks you down, there is still hope. I've got to go with the movie because as much as I love literary cynicism, I feel like this ending more appropriately completes the story. Round 2, the characters. Donna Trenton, played wonderfully by Dee Wallace in the film, is unsatisfied with her daily life. Looking in the mirror every morning, to her, is like watching her world slowly waste away. And to top it all off, both her husband and her son are gone all day, and so she's incredibly lonely. It's for this reason she cheats on her busybody husband, Vic Trenton, played equally well by Daniel Hugh Kelly, with Steve Kemp, played by Christopher Stone. Kemp's youthful attitude in turn makes her feel youthful, and his embrace gives her much-needed comfort. Vic, on the other hand, is preoccupied with keeping the family financially stable, along with his best friend and business partner, Roger Breakstone, played briefly by Arthur Rosenberg. And caught in the middle of all this is Vic and Donna's son, Tad, played by Danny Pintaro. This entire dynamic is captured perfectly in both mediums, and the cast is spot on. But there is one thing the book does do that the movie doesn't, and that's give life to the sub-characters of Castle Rock. For example, there's Auntie Evelyn Chalmers, the oldest living resident of Castle Rock and local psychic. She predicts the oncoming storm that would be Cujo, and essentially serves as Stephen King's foreshadower. She's understandably absent in the movie due to her supernatural powers, but it's because of characters like her that Castle Rock feels like a living, breathing entity unto itself.
And I don't think the movie succeeds in that regard as much as the novel does. And so I've got to go with it.
Round 3. Aesthetic versus the prose. Cujo is notorious for being a novel written at the time King was at the peak of his alcoholism, and it shows, but not in the way you'd think. Drunken King is still a master craftsman, and the subject of alcoholism never comes up in the story itself. No, it's in the tone of the novel that we can see the bottom of 1,000 empty bottles. It's one of King's darkest works, with every positive moment infiltrated by a cloud of despair.
Later, as dusk settled down and the heat slacked off a little, and the first fireflies started to stitch seams in the air across the backyard, Vic pushed his son on the swing. "Higher, Daddy, higher! If you go any higher, you're gonna loop the loop, kid. Gimme under then, Dad, gimme under." Vic gave Tad a huge push, propelling the swing toward the sky where the first stars were just beginning to appear, and ran all the way under the swing. Tad screamed joyfully, his head tilted back, his hair blowing. "That was good, Daddy. Gimme under again." Vic gave his son under again, from the front this time, and Tad went soaring into the still hot night. Aunt Evie Chalmers lived close by, and Tad's shouts of terrified glee were the last sound she heard when she died. Her heart gave out, one of its paper-thin walls breaching suddenly, and almost painlessly, as she sat in her kitchen chair, a cup of coffee by one hand and a straight-eight Herbert Tarleton by the other. She leaned back and her vision darkened, and somewhere she heard a child crying. And for a moment it seemed that the cries were joyful, but as she went out, suddenly propelled as if by a hard but not unkind push from behind, it seemed to her that the child was screaming in fear, in agony. Then she was gone.
Drunken King does not have nice things to say about the world around us, and he is certainly not kind to his characters, least of all the one character you may have noticed I didn't mention earlier, Cujo himself. In the novel, King constantly shifts perspective from one character to another, which authors often do. But what's unique about this book is that King puts us directly into the mind of the dog. And by doing this, he paints Cujo as the most sympathetic character in the whole book.
Cujo trotted away. He shook himself again. He pawed helplessly at his muzzle. The blood was already clotting, drying to a cake, but it hurt. Dogs have a sense of self-consciousness that is far out of proportion to their intelligence, and Cujo was disgusted with himself. He didn't want to go home. One of his trinity, the man, the woman, or the boy, would see that he had done something to himself. It was possible that one of them might call him a bad dog, and at this particular moment, he certainly considered himself a bad dog.
We feel so bad for him because we know why he's doing it and we know how the disease is affecting his judgment. This is something the film tries its best to replicate but never fully succeeds. When we're left with just the visuals, we see Cujo just as the other characters do, as a monster stalking our every move. That aside, the one thing I think the film does translate perfectly is the look of small-town New England, or at least how I imagined it when I was reading the novel.
Still, the point goes to the book because of passages like this one.
Shortly after those mortal events in the chambered dooryard, Cujo's remains were cremated. The ashes went out with the trash and were disposed of at the Augusta waste treatment plant. It would perhaps not be amiss to point out that he had always tried to be a good dog. He had tried to do all the things his man and his woman, and most of all his boy, had asked or expected of him. He would have died for them if that had been required. He had never wanted to kill anybody. He had been struck by something, possibly destiny, or fate, or only a degenerative nerve disease called rabies. Free will was not a factor.
Well said, King. Well said.
Final round.
The scares.
The fear in Cujo comes from two distinct places: intense physical threats, i.e. a St. Bernard ripping your fucking throat out, and psychological warfare. But these aren't normal mind games, they're imaginary mind games. Donna is constantly projecting a personality onto Cujo, one that is calculating her every move, taunting her every failure.
Donna stood by the car, frowning. She had heard the first stone click off the gravel, also the second. But the third, it was as if it had never come down. There had been no minor click. What did that mean? Suddenly, she didn't want to run for the porch door until she could see there was nothing lurking in front of the car. Then yes. Okay. But, just to make sure. She took 1 step. 2. 3. Cujo got ready. His eyes glowed in the darkness. 4 steps from the door of the car. Her heart was a drum in her chest. Now Cujo could see the woman's hips and thighs. In a moment she would see him. Good. He wanted her to see him. 5 steps from the door. Donna turned her head. Her neck creaked like a spring on an old screen door. She felt a premonition, a sense of low sureness. She turned her head, looking for Cujo. Cujo was there. He had been there all the time, crouched low, hiding from her, waiting for her, laying back in the tall bushes. Their eyes locked for a moment, Donna's wide blue ones, Cujo's muddy red ones. For a moment she was looking out of her eyes, seeing herself, seeing the woman. Was he seeing himself through hers? Then he sprang at her.
This is a very effective form of horror, one that harkens back to our childhoods. Much like Tad, we all gave the shadows in our closet malicious intent, when in reality they were nothing more than the toys we stuffed inside them the previous day. This very same concept applies to Donna, though unlike our closets, Cujo does intend to harm her, just not for the reasons she imagines. The film actually does capture this just as well as the book, though in a different way. In the book, we're given Donna's thoughts and the dark places she goes, whereas in the film, we're the ones projecting onto Cujo.
And for that reason, both versions are equally terrifying.
And despite the last round's tie, we still have a winner. Yes, the book edges out the film by a smidge, though I still contend the film's ending is vastly superior. In fact, I feel like if the book had come out with that ending originally, it would be virtually perfect. But alas, as most of his fans already know, Mr. King has never been known for his great endings.
What is it?